Often when we're filming our mammal cousins, it's very tempting to impose our own human anthropocentric values on their actions, and that is, I think, a mistake. Probably the most interesting example of this I've seen has been working with orca, sometimes known as killer whale. On a beach in Patagonia, at exactly the right time of the right tide, a pod of orca will surge up onto the sands to snatch seal pups and to drag them back down into the surf where they feed on them. We waited for 5 days to see this, hunkered down low against, freezing Patagonian winds, trying to make as little an impression as possible on the seal pups that were playing around in the surf. And finally, the pod approached, they came up, and one animal surged up and onto the sands itself to snatch an animal and drag it back down into the water. It's an incredible thing to see. Orca could weigh 8 or 9 tons, and to risk beaching themselves to find a meal, that is a really heavy investment of energy and of serious risk to themselves as well. But the next bit was the part of the whole scenario that took us by surprise. So once they had this tiny pup in the sea, instead of just finishing it off in a heartbeat as they surely could have done, they seemed to play with it, to toy with it, to go round and round it in circles, tossing it out the water with their tails and not going in for the final killer bite. Well, this wasn't an adult fur seal, it was a small animal that seriously couldn't have done them any damage. And then it got even weirder, because we found on that same beach several carcasses of pups which had been taken by orca. They had very definitive bite marks from the orca on them, and they had been killed, but not eaten. Otherwise, the carcass was completely perfect. Why would any animal go to that degree of effort and risk and then not eat it? It didn't make any sense to us. Perhaps the answer lay in a different filming trip, also with orca, but in British Columbia. My team and I had been lucky enough to happen upon a pod of orca that were socializing, and we went out in our sea kayaks and paddled alongside them. The orca were leaping out of the water, breaching, coming alongside me and just rolling onto their side so they could look up at me as they came past. It was truly breathtaking. But then they went from this playful, supersized dolphin, which is essentially what they are, into full-on predatory mode. And I've never seen an animal switch as fast as this, ever. They'd encountered a fully grown male Steller's sea lion, which is 3/4 of a ton, 750 kilos of flashing teeth, a serious predator in its own right. And the pod of orca cornered it into a bay. So we got out of our kayaks and got onto shore, and we came right up close to see the whole breathtaking spectacle play out. They took it down by breaching up and landing on top of it, by slapping it with their tails, and just generally tiring the animal out. It was outgunned, outnumbered, outweighed, and it simply had no chance, although it kept trying to make a run for the kelp beds where the orca wouldn't follow. Watching this happen, it took a long time, and you could see it getting more and more tired, more and more worn out, and you feel for them. Everyone's seen sea lions, and they have these great big dark eyes. They really pull on your heartstrings because they have, it would appear, so many similarities to us as human beings. They certainly are. They do share a common ancestor with us. But then finally, when the animal was no longer a threat, when it was so tired and so beaten that it couldn't fight back, then they brought in their youngsters. They brought in their calves. They were quite young animals, but they were clearly being taught by their parents how to hunt, replicating their parents' maneuvers. They were also breaching up out of the water and tail slapping on the Steller sea lion, and this went on for a good while. You can see that it was an instructional process. They were using the Steller sea lion as a teaching aid, and that was pretty uncomfortable to watch. It would appear to us to be incredibly cruel. But the next bit was the bit that just took it to a whole different level. Because once all of that was finished, once the lesson was over, rather than coming in and finishing off the Steller sea lion, they all turned on some unseen, unheard signal and just swam off to sea and left it. They didn't eat a single mouthful of that Steller sea lion, and we just couldn't understand why. But it seems that orca are one of the animals that indulge in what is known as surplus killing. That is, killing that is not designed to be for food. Kind of seems that they compartmentalize their lives. So if they're traveling, they're traveling. They're socializing, they're socializing. If they're hunting, that's what they're doing. And likewise, if they're teaching and learning, well, they don't play with their food. It's really tough for you as an observer to see an animal going through so much stress and pain and overwhelming exertion, and then for it not even to result in, precious calories for the orca. It seems so cruel. But then surely we as human beings are the worst culprit of that. There is no other animal that will engage with it and kill potential food, but then not eat it and just kill it for sport. In that, surely we human beings are the master.
My name is Vianney Dejenge, and I'm a wildlife cameraman. Back in 2016, it was in the Masai Mara, and I was following 2 baby hyenas. It is a very grim story, but I would like it to be balanced. And these events happened right toward the end of our shoot. On that very last week, we were waiting for all the females to come back to the den and being greeted by their babies. Usually they will turn up, they'll give that slight little grunt noise, and then the extraordinary thing is that the old babies will pop out, listening to their mother's very specific grunt. So it was just before the sunset. We were at our usual spot waiting, and I'm there, happy with my cup of coffee in the car. But I've spotted at the same time 2 lions in the peripheric of the den. And I thought, something's going to happen. No hyenas came back, and I was a bit suspicious. By this time, they should all be there, because I just knew the routine. I got so into it, and I started suspecting that something's not quite right. All of a sudden, this alpha female, she turns up. She's on her own, no other hyenas, and she comes right close to the entrance of the den, and she's calling, and nothing happens, and she keeps calling, and I'm like, well, she's not actually part of the story. I should concentrate on the lions, and I kept my eyes between the 2. Well, it did actually last about half an hour, and she kept doing that, and I thought, oh no, there's something not quite right, and she started pushing her head into those tiny little hole where the babies goes into. So and then she's pushing ahead and starting to engage the driver. And he was like, no, that's just a normal thing. And then all of a sudden she comes out with a baby on her mouth. But that's just how hyenas carry their babies, with that powerful jaw, but they know how to be gentle with that sort of movement. The baby was just kind of flappy, she wasn't moving at all. And then she puts the baby on the ground and starts moving, touching the baby with her nose and the mouth just to check. I think she was checking whether the baby was all right. And then the baby wasn't moving. Or she was simply dead. And then the driver confirmed it. She said that baby's dead. And then all of a sudden, she became larger than usual. The hair on her neck was completely raised. You can just tell that animal is not quite herself. We were just witnessing a mother basically eating her own baby. There are a number of reasons why she probably did that. Perhaps she just wanted to keep her social standing high, not showing her weakness to other hyenas, because she's like the queen. Therefore, everything about her offspring should be powerful, you know. She gets access to the best meats. She gets to mate with the best specimen. And perhaps that's one of the reasons she didn't want to show that weakness, or she didn't want to attract other predators, or maybe she just wanted to keep the den clean. Only a hyena can tell you why that happens. Usually when I come back from a shoot, and I'll tell my kids everything I've been filming, and beautiful stories.
Oh mon Dieu! Wow, look at that.
But that one, I never told my kids that. So, yeah.
One of my favorite animals, if I was really pressed to name one out of the whole animal kingdom, it would have to be the African buffalo. Now, if you're not familiar with these animals, you could be forgiven for thinking they're glorified wild cows or some ancient ancestor of the domestic cow. They're not actually, they are only very distantly related. Their unpredictable wild nature has earned them quite the reputation as one of the most dangerous animals in the African savannah. When I was growing up in Kenya as a young girl, I was fascinated that of all the animals out there, lions, hyena, leopard, cheetah, elephant, it was the African buffalo that was the one that seemed to inspire the most reverence and actually fear as well. But also it was often an animal that was at the heart of some of the best stories that I would listen to around the campfire. At the foothills of Mount Kenya, called Aberdez National Park. It was a very bright full moon that lit the scene. Beautiful stars like just filled the sky. It was back in the day where we didn't have normal cameras, any kind of night vision capability, any night filming, infrared, all that stuff. We'd been up for several hours. Mostly what we saw were various impala, gazelle, some elephant as well that had gathered around this salt lick. All of a sudden it was heads up. Of course, you know, everyone watching the scene was hoping that this was the moment a big predator was going to rock up to the scene. And slowly, the impala, the gazelle, and eventually even the elephant sort of cleared and moved off the salt lick and went to the edges. In came this lone, male, old African buffalo, limping. He looked tired. He looked like he was in pain. They tend to have these kind of almost like wrinkled circles around their eyes and on their face as they get older. So there were a lot of cues there that we were picking up that this was an old male, but he wasn't just old, he was injured. He just slowly walked through, head hanging low, very determined, moving in one clear direction to the center of that salt lake. And when he got there, he dropped his head down and started licking, lapping up the salt that he'd come for. In the wild, an animal will do everything in its power to hide an injury. If they're not predated, they're either injured or they simply get too old to keep up with their herd. It doesn't want to look vulnerable. It doesn't want to be singled out by a predator as an easy kill. All the other animals looked incredibly wary of him. With such an obvious injury, he could barely put any weight down on that foot. He was clearly in a lot of pain, even despite his size, vulnerable. So there he made his way right to the center, presumably because that's where he felt safest. That was where there was no scrub, where potential predators could lie in wait. The elephants particularly, who, because of their size and numbers, you would have expected to dominate the area around the salt lake. The older females definitely looked like they weren't interested in trying to challenge this buffalo. So these two young male elephants sort of tried a few mock charges, you know, trumpeting and flapping their ears and moving towards him. And watching this old bull buffalo, he would sort of raise his head up and just kind of stare them down, just face them head on and just tip his head up at them like that. And the body language, there was no mistaking that the message was clear. This buffalo was saying, I am here and I'm not moving for anybody. You know, what I saw in that scene was tenacity, resilience, and holding space, taking up space. Ever since that day, I have the utmost respect for African buffaloes. The very same personality traits that earned them that reputation of being ill-tempered, bad-natured, dangerous animals are the same traits that mean they are also unbelievably resilient animals. The number of times I've either seen firsthand or in natural history films where a single animal will be taken down by 3, 4 lions, and you're thinking to yourself, come on buddy, this has got to be it. Your number's up, and just at that moment it finds another gear and it fights its way out of that situation to live another day.
Hello, my name is Gavin Thurston. I've spent over 30 years watching and filming wildlife for series such as Planet Earth, Blue Planet, Frozen Planet, etc. My job has taken me all over the world, but there's one place that's drawn me back like a magnet time and time again. And that's where this story takes place. It's the Masai Mara in Kenya. The event I'm going to tell you about took place almost 30 years ago, but it was so shocking that it stuck hard in my memory. The Masai Mara is a national game reserve. It's mainly rolling hills of open savanna, dotted with trees, and the Mara River flows through it west to east, dividing it from the Serengeti to the south. This has to be in the top 5 places for abundant wildlife on this planet and is home to the usual top predators: lions, cheetah, leopard. You may also know of the Mara because of the annual wildebeest migration. Tens of thousands of animals follow the rains as the seasons swing north and south over the year. And this rain brings fresh grass, which is food for the herbivores. One such common herbivore is the Thompson's gazelle, or Tommy. It's a small, goat-sized gazelle with a white belly. It has a white rump patch and he's got 2 distinctive horizontal black side stripes. The males have quite substantial horns for rutting and defence. The female horns are shorter, about yay big, but would still do some damage. One morning, heading out to film, expert spotter driver Dave Breed saw a female Tommy out on its own, and it was behaving really strangely. He drove us a bit closer to have a look. Looking through binoculars, we could see she was pregnant, and it was soon clear she was going to give birth. Herbivores time their births to coincide with the rains, as there's then much more lush grass to eat to raise their young. By all giving birth around the same time, there's less chance of your offspring being the one to get eaten by a predator. As a wildlife cameraman, I'm always on the lookout for interesting behaviours, even if they're not strictly on the script. I readied my camera, and Dave swung the car round into position for me to film. She circled slightly, and then knelt down on her front knees. Within 30 seconds or so, a tiny head and feet appeared. 5 seconds later, the tiny baby flopped out onto the grass, and Mum turned round and began to lick the tiny fawn. It's a magical moment to witness. The licking helps clear the baby's nose so it can breathe, and creates a stronger bond between mum and baby. It also helps suppress the smell of the birth fluids that could attract a predator. A minute or so later and the baby was already trying to get up on its feet. But these newborns are vulnerable out on the plains of Africa, and so have evolved to get up and running quickly. I was enjoying this tender moment between the mother and her newborn baby when she started to look nervously into the distance. David's sharp eyes soon picked it up. There was something running in from almost a kilometre away. A large male baboon. Baboons are omnivores and opportunistic. They'll eat pretty much anything. They've got amazing eyesight, and clearly this baboon had seen the baby. From way, way off, Dave warned me about what might be about to happen. So I swung the camera around and focused. The baboon was running at full tilt, pounding across the plains, making a beeline for the Tommy and her baby. Closer to us, the young fawn was almost standing, its legs wobbling, taking its first steps. But the baboon was closing in. I really felt for the gazelle mother. Her instinct knew what was coming, and she desperately tried to nuzzle her new baby to walk. Too late. The male baboon was soon on them, and it grabbed the baby from under Mum's nose. Mum was not going to give up on her baby though, and she just charged and charged and jabbed the baboon with her horns, and the baboon leapt back and dropped the baby, and for a moment it looked like the mum might be able to defend it. But these males are smart and quick. He darted in and grabbed the baby again. This time he took it in his mouth and ran. It happened so fast that the mum didn't see the baby go, and she stayed looking in the grass. And that was it. The baboon just went off a few hundred meters and sat behind the nearest termite mound. It's pretty grim. Not the sort of thing you can show on any screen. The baboon slowly ate the baby alive as it bleated for its mother. And that's the image and memory I have. In the space of maybe 5 minutes, I witnessed the full, gruesome circle of life. From being born and taking its first breath, its feet on the plains of Africa, to staring into the jaws of death and taking its last breath. Life can be harsh, and these brutal scenarios take place daily in the wild. Thankfully, we aren't there to witness it all.
The whole silence of the entire forest was just broken. This is not usually how a tiger makes a kill. My name is Shivang Mehta. I'm a nature and wildlife photographer based out of India. I've been spending the last 2 decades documenting wildcats and other rare species of my country. This encounter happened in Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan in India. Ranthambore is probably one of India's very unique habitats where it's a combination and blend of ancient history and natural history. So the park has got a very unique kind of a habitat with some beautiful lakes, ruins, monuments, and the grand Ranthambore fort in the backdrop. This is a place where wars were being fought at one point of time, and in today's time, wars are still fought, but in the animal kingdom, in the tiger kingdom. The key character around which this story is revolving is T19 Krishna, who was the reigning queen of Ranthambore at that time. I started following Krishna's lineage because I was fortunate enough to document her mother, Queen Machli, the Lady of the Lakes, as she was called. In fact, the most photographed tiger of the world at one point of time. And she died as the oldest surviving wild tiger. So Krishna was Machli's last litter. In 2014, Krishna gave birth to 3 cubs. Those 3 cubs were called Arrowhead, Pac-Man, and Lightning. Arrowhead and Lightning were the 2 daughters, the 2 female cubs, and Pac-Man was the male cub. Pac-Man, in fact, derived his name because of a peculiar mark on his forehead, which resembled that video game which children play called Pac-Man. All 3 cubs were very different from each other. Arrowhead was a much more dominating cub and a bold cub. And Lightning was a bit of a timid tigress, and Pac-Man was also bold, but as in case of all young male tigers, he always used to stick around with his mother. So sometime in the summers of 2015, in the month of April, while we were following this family that day, that morning, it was a very dull morning, nothing much was happening. But we guys are wildlife photographers, so we like trying till the last moment. And so I just saw my watch, and there's still around half an hour, 45 minutes for the park to close for the morning session. So let's take one more round. Just when we were going towards the lake area, there was a stretch which was flooded with around 15-20 vehicles. All the cameras were pointed in one direction, and it was very evident that there's something happening out there. So we decided to park ourselves away from this entire crowd, and our plan was just to wait for some time, and maybe whichever tiger was out there, it decides to move, and we may get some kind of a view. Just when we were waiting, I just turned around and saw that this young bloke, Pac-Man, he had started stalking a deer. And, I just quickly changed my lenses and switched on to a wider focal length because it was too close. And He charged at the deer. Now, when tigers are making their kill, they normally go in for the neck and just choke their prey. And that's when, the prey dies instantly. But in this case, the approach of young packman was totally wrong because he caught hold of the deer, but from the backside. The deer was struggling in his mouth, and then he dragged this deer to a higher vantage point where he tried to suffocate the deer by sitting on top of it, but still, the deer didn't die. And the whole silence of the entire forest was just broken because of the constant cacophony and the shrilling sounds of this deer. This confused tiger, he decided to just flip around the prey, and he started, eating the deer from the hindsight, and the deer was still alive. And this entire struggle continued for around 15 to 20 minutes. That's when the deer died finally. Inexperience was at public display because, this is not usually how a tiger makes a kill, as this inexperienced cub was trying to make, which I consider it as his first kill, because in so many months, I had never seen these young cubs, attempting any kind of a hunt on their own. Surprisingly, the mother and the daughter, Arrowhead, they were seen in the vicinity. I could see them standing at my location, but they didn't do anything. The mother could have come and helped his son to successfully complete this hunt, but nothing happened. As this whole drama was unfolding in front of me, my heart was going through mixed emotions. On one hand, there was this tiger I had seen as a cub, and I had followed his journey for 14 months, and I was so happy to see that he had taken those first steps towards becoming an independent wild tiger by making his first kill. And on the other hand, there were those loud, shrilling sounds, painful sounds of the deer. All that, pain and agony, it was very difficult for me to handle. There are a lot of questions which still remain unanswered. It's a mysterious world of tigers. Why didn't the mother come and support this hunt? I feel that the tigress was helping his son to become independent. When I look back and think about this entire incident, my key takeaway was learning about a key human value, being independent. There are moments in life when one bold step has to be taken by every person, and that probably will be the step towards independence. This male tiger cub had taken that particular step that morning. And every time I pass through that area in Ranthambore, those sounds still are quite fresh in my mind, but it would have given so much of confidence to him to become an independent, wild tiger living in solitude.
My name's Alex Vale, and I'm a wildlife cinematographer. Although I'm from tropical North Queensland, I'm lucky enough to do a lot of my work in the polar regions of the world, so up north in the Arctic and down south in the Antarctic. And what I'm going to tell you about today is leopard seals. We were going to what is one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen, Sierra Cove. Now, pulling into it, my breath was just taken away. It's got this huge glacier on one side, and then there's this bay of the ocean that's just filled with all these icebergs of different shapes and different hues of blue. And then on the other side is this rocky area, these big sort of rounded rocks, kind of unusual for Antarctica. And perched on top of these is this small Argentinian field station. So we were there to film a sequence on gentoo penguin fledglings being predated upon, or at least attacked by, leopard seals, the ultimate villain. So I got there about a couple of weeks before the main action was due to start, And during this time, I was filming the Gentoo penguin chicks up in the colony. So the colony is just right around the Argentinian base. I only had about an hour commute to work each day. And I absolutely fell in love with the chicks. They're just the most gorgeous little things. Penguins in general are one of my favorite animals, actually. So the little chicks, the Gentoos, they're just these little sort of fluffy grey and white balls of joy. That's probably about the best way that I can describe them. The chicks are pretty clumsy. They fall over bits of rock and down little ledges, but they just pick themselves up and off they go again. So they're absolutely gorgeous, and I really fell in love with them. And that made what happened next even sort of harder to see. So the main event was when these penguin chicks go into the water for the first time in their lives, which is called fledging. So they lose all of their down and they get their adult feathers, and they have to learn to swim basically immediately. And they're not particularly good at it to start with. Leopard seals are basically the ultimate predator. They're massive, about 3.5 meters long, really chunky, really strong, very fast in the water. And they've got this really kind of evil look to them. They've got a massive long head, makes them look a little bit like a velociraptor, but underwater. And their mouth almost seems to go too far back in their jaw, and it sort of comes up at the end, which gives them this slightly sinister sort of grin. So they seem to know when the fledging season for the Gentoo penguin chicks is, which is only for a couple of weeks each year. And I imagine these leopard seals come in from far and wide, because there was about 4 or 5 of them there at a time. They just sort of zoom up behind them and grab them by the feet and pull them down, because these penguin fledglings, they're not particularly good at swimming yet. At times there was brash ice in the bay, so these sort of bits of ice of different size that the penguins would have to sort of clamber over, and the leopard seals would come up underneath that and they'd just pull the penguin chicks down. Certainly some of the fledglings escaped, but a lot of them got taken. But the really bad-natured bit of what the leopard seals did was how long they would play with these chicks before they finally kind of put them out of their misery. So they'd grab the chick, they'd pull it underwater, and then they'd let it go. And you're thinking, what's this leopard seal doing? That chick was hardly even struggling, and the chick would shoot off and the leopard seal would chase after it. Not very fast really for a leopard seal, and grab it again, pull it underwater. The chick would sometimes play dead, sort of seemingly to make the leopard seal let it go, and then leopard seal would let it go, and the chick would try to get onto a bit of ice, which would fall over, and the leopard seal would grab it again. And oh man, just watching this, it was pretty heartbreaking. Like, it was what we were there to film. So, you know, we were of course glad that we were getting the sequence that we'd come for, but it was pretty disturbing to watch, to be honest. It just had this feeling of, oh, come on, leopard seals, just put these poor chicks out of their misery. These are the chicks that I'd been filming for weeks, and if they were gonna get eaten, they could at least get taken out quickly, but that's not really what happened. Eventually the leopard seals would kill the chicks. They would, it was pretty grisly actually. They'd do it through this process called flailing, where they'd grab the chick by the head eventually, and then they'd sort of toss it from side to side, and that would cause the chick to separate into a couple of parts, and it was pretty nasty, pretty grisly. Most of the time the leopard seal would eat the chick after it had done this. A few times we saw just the dead bodies of the chicks floating around, but generally they would eat them, but in some cases they wouldn't, and that was another thing that made us think, man, why are they killing these chicks if they're not even going to eat some of them? So this really got me wondering, why on earth do the leopard seals do this? Why don't they just eat the chicks straight away? Now we've talked to a really eminent leopard seal scientist, and there's a few theories of why the leopard seals might do this. So one is they might be trying to sort of weaken the chicks before they go in for the killing blow, so that the chick is less able to fight back. Penguins have got really sharp beaks. They could totally peck the leopard seal in the eye. Now another potential explanation that I think is probably more likely, in that it may allow them to learn how to catch these penguins better. Now you might think, well, why do they need to learn how to catch the penguins' chicks better? Like they catch them really easily, right? This really abundant food source of the fledglings is only available for maybe a couple of weeks a year for these leopard seals, and then in other times they need to catch much faster prey, such as adult Gen 2 penguins. Now, I filmed a leopard seal a couple of times trying to catch an adult Gen 2 penguin before the chicks went into the water. And boy, those leopard seals have a much harder time with the adults. You know, the adults are so fast in the water and so maneuverable, and the leopard seal is just zipping around behind it. And eventually the adult just flies out of the water towards the rocks, probably launches itself 5 to 10 meters through the air, skids up onto the rocks, runs into a rock and sort of shakes itself off, and it's fine, and poor leopard seal didn't catch it. So this sort of instinct of the leopard seals, which leads them to play with the chicks when they're not really that hungry and the chicks are actually very easy for them to catch. This may actually be really beneficial for the leopard seals in getting better at catching harder to catch prey, such as Gen 2 penguins. So what appears to be kind of bad-natured, cruel behaviour on the part of the leopard seal may be really important for helping it to survive through the harder times of the year.
The moment I saw it, I thought, my God, I'm looking at cordyceps.
The camera rolling.
So I'm Lizzie Daly, a biologist and wildlife broadcaster. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to venture into a beautiful part of the world. It's a place called Danam Valley, and it sits in Borneo. I remember, arriving, feeling really excited. This is a place with, clouded leopards, orangutans. You've got, rhinoceros hornbills flying over. You can hear them flapping. You can feel the warmth and the humidity of an environment like this rainforest. And we were really lucky because we were there at a time where there was a unique event happening. It's called mass flowering. It's basically where, all these trees, life and fruits burst into flower and into life, and it creates this kind of supercharged environment. At the beginning of our trip, we start heading on these kind of overgrown trails, and the minute you step on these trails, you are immersed in this environment. You can feel the humidity. It's raining on and off all day, so you're damp. There's lots of noise. You're surrounded by the sounds of these emperor cicadas, which kind of almost like the pulsing heartbeat of the rainforest. I like to think I'm quite comfortable in natural environments, in hostile environments, but there is nothing like walking through a dense rainforest by yourself. You are truly swallowed up by the environment. Suddenly you're in an overwhelming chorus of just the rainforest. You're being, rained on every 5 minutes. I would keep stopping along this path to notice some of the life around me. And I remember stopping and I saw a trail of ants. Ants are a big player in this environment, and these ants were kind of going across the footpath that I just crossed. I was watching them for a while. I noticed that next to the trail there were a few individual ants acting kind of strange. There was one ant that was carrying off another dead ant. I thought, not much of it. Perhaps that ant was ill. But there was another ant kind of moving slowly. It wasn't part of the rest of the trail. Constantly cleaning itself. It would stop and clean its antennae and its legs quite thoroughly, and it was just moving in a really odd way. Later on in the day, as I was walking along a different trail, I was standing next to this trunk, and it was kind of covered in mosses, this beautiful kind of vibrant green that you can only get in this kind of environment. And I noticed kind of like a mossy lump that was attached to this tree, and I realised it was a cicada. But the cicada wasn't singing, it wasn't calling, and it wasn't moving at all. I realised that that cicada is actually dead. It was covered in this kind of fungus appearance, and it was basically looked like it melted into the side of the tree. I wasn't looking at a natural death here. All of a sudden, this beautiful environment, which has so much wonder and beauty in it, suddenly the darker side came to the fore, and it at that moment changed my entire perception of this environment. I was looking at cordyceps. When we think of a fungus, images of mushrooms, crazy toadstools, or just blue mould on some bread comes to mind. It all seems quite benign, but cordyceps is anything but benign. It's a parasitic fungus that infects and can even manipulate the behaviour of its animal host. That sounds sinister, but here's what probably happened to the ant that I saw. When a cordyceps spore landed on the ant's body, it would have released a mix of proteins and enzymes such as chitinase to break down the ant's harder outer shell. And the infective hypha used mechanical pressure to basically drill through the exoskeleton. Once inside the ant, cordyceps hyphae set about reproducing. But unlike, say, a bacterial infection, these cells now start to get organised, joining together to create a mycelial network. Similar really to the networks that run underground through a forest, but in this case through the body of the ant, using the ant's own cells as fuel. A few years ago, in fact, a research team in the US painstakingly scanned an infected carpenter ant, discovering that the mycelial network actually wrapped its way through the individual muscle fibres of the ant. What's more, this network seemed to leave the brain intact. The traditional view was that the fungus controlled the ant's behaviour through a cocktail of mind-bending drugs. But this new research has led people to liken cordyceps to a macabre puppet master, cutting off the brain from the body and controlling the limbs of the ant through its network of mycelial filaments. Then cordyceps is ready for its grim finale. In the case of the zombie ant fungus, it drives the infected ant's body to climb to the top of a nearby plant. Once the fungus detects it's at the perfect height, the ant's then forced to lock its tiny jaws around a bit of foliage. And here, finally, the ant dies in what has become known as the death grip. The cordyceps mycelium causes the ant to bite so hard that it destroys the muscle filaments that slide past each other, causing the jaw to lock shut forever. Finally, a fruiting body sprouts at the back of the ant's head, showering down fungal spores on the rainforest below, hoping to land on another poor, unsuspecting ant, restarting the whole cycle again. There are over 500 species of cordyceps that have been identified, and we can safely say there are many more that we don't even know about. Each species of cordyceps has evolved to infect a specific host, such as an ant, a cicada, a caterpillar, or even a spider species. We understand the precise nature of very few of these relationships. Little is known of the true biodiversity of the fungi kingdom. Around 120,000 species have been formally described, but it's thought there may be as many as 2.2 to 3.8 million species. We are only beginning to scratch the surface of what evolution has to offer. But this insidious fungus crafts nature's very own walking dead, earning its victim the very worst of deaths. I think it's that aspect of its life cycle that really fires up our imagination, earning names like zombie ant fungus and inspiring science fiction such as The Girl with All the Gifts and video games such as The Last of Us, where parasitic fungus has jumped from infecting ants or cicadas to infecting and controlling humans. But before you have nightmares, you'll be glad to know that it doesn't infect humans.
They were circling around one individual, all going for this one otter, the single most brutal, most interesting, and the hardest to watch thing that I've ever witnessed in nature. I'm Dan O'Neill. I'm a documentary filmmaker and biologist. The first expedition I ever went on was nearly 10 years ago to Guyana. It's a small country in the north of South America, and it's incredibly special to me. It's 85% pristine tropical rainforest, right on the equator, and it is known not just as the land of giants, but also the land of many waters. It was an ambitious expedition, a very small team of us, and we were going 300 miles into the interior of the Amazon, up this river system that basically nobody goes to. I kind of had this hit list of creatures I wanted to see. Iconic Amazonian wildlife, like howler monkeys, harpy eagles, tapirs, even the fabled jaguar. But in the land of many waters in Guyana, the king of those waters is really the giant river otters. 100 years ago, they were pretty much found across all of South America, all of the river systems. But in 1993, their status was changed to endangered, because over that period of time, they had massive pressures from hunting, mining, logging, habitat loss. So I was hopeful, but I never thought that really I was going to have that kind of iconic otter encounter that I dreamed of having, until I went up to these remote regions of Guyana. The only way to get to the kind of areas of the Amazon that humans don't bother to go is to go along the rivers and go up waterfalls. And you have to portage. 1, 2, 3, you get out of your boats, you cut a transect through the jungle right to the top where it comes out, and then you drag your boats all the way up and all of your gear up.
This is the bamboo line.
And then you get back in your boat and you push on. And you push on, you find another waterfall, do exactly the same thing. And some rivers have several, sometimes tens of waterfalls that go far up into their most remote regions. And every kind of waterfall stairwell you go up, you reach a new land, a new citadel of the wildlife where they're slightly less afraid of people. And eventually when you go 4, 5, 6 waterfalls up, those animals have never seen a person before. They don't know to be afraid of you, and you can get unbelievably close.
There's a wild tapir, about 5 feet from us.
We would drift down the river, and we'd set our camps along the river's edge. And we do that before nightfall, and we wake up early, and then we break down our camp and we carry on. But one morning, I woke up really, really early, about 5 o'clock, and you could hear the dawn chorus, and everything is extremely loud. The rainforest is waking up. And I got into the canoe, and I just drifted down the river. And I remember hearing this unmistakable sound, which is the sound of giant river otters, a troop of them. And then as I got closer and closer, they started to make another unmistakable otter sound, a kind of wah, 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 wah. You often hear them, one sound, and they're gone. But this was really powerful, much more guttural than any of the otter sounds we'd heard along our way. And I came around the bend, and there were all of these spy-hopping otters, loads and loads of them coming up and looking at something. And at first I thought that it was a battle of 2 troops of otters and I was going to be able to get in close. I realised that they weren't really all at each other, but they were circling around one individual. They were mercilessly just going for this guy, at him and at him and at him, and they were all on the tops of the water. Usually when they come up, they go down and they disappear and they come up somewhere else, but these were all up, their heads were all out of the water. They were working in such a way, they were using their hunting teamwork against this individual. They would spy hop up when he was up, and they'd go down when he was down, and they would corner him, and they'd attack and attack and attack. And obviously I couldn't see underwater, but I know how brutal they can be. They could have easily been giving him really bad injuries that could end up in death. It was really incredible to watch. I'd never been so close to such a visceral wildlife encounter. They are predators. They're big, apex Amazonian predators with very sharp, very large teeth, very sharp claws, and they're intelligent hunters, and they were using all of those skills on this one otter. Smart animals know that fighting is costly. It's a really costly thing to do. So there's very, very few confirmed cases of otter fights. You know, there's one thing being excited about seeing something that's, you know, often never captured, and another thing to actually witness just how brutal those rare situations can be. Otters live in primarily extended family groups, but they will occasionally accept new individuals and they will drive out individuals, mostly males. They have their sections of river, they respect other groups and they know their lines and they'll avoid each other. And I think what might have happened in this situation, in this case, was a male was either in the process of being kicked out of a group, or it was one that was on its own and it thought, this is my chance to join a group, and they weren't having any of it. But it's understandable. If one's on its own, all of those skills, all of that evolutionary history, it's not made for that. They're incredibly territorial animals, and that is the choice that they make. They have to show their strength, and they have to rule their section of river, and if that means killing other otters, that's exactly what they'll do. And it's not what you expect to see. You think you can imagine fights between different species, but there's something particularly horrible about watching one species attack its own kind. And how much more scary that would have been for an otter to watch animals that look like you trying to kill you. It's such a powerful image of the realities of the competition of the Amazon. This expedition was 10 years ago, and I've been going to Guyana almost every year since. I've even done that expedition more than once. And in all the times I've been out there, and all the trips I've been on, I've never had an encounter like that since. It is the single most brutal, most interesting, and the hardest to watch thing that I've ever witnessed in nature.
That puts it as a juvenile, probably a year or so old, maybe just over a year old, I would think. They actually use calf, I'm guessing. So, yeah, pretty much 3 times that length. And then newborn at about 4.5 meters. So that's a calf from last year, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm Cal Major, I'm a vet, I'm an advocate for our ocean and for nature, and a filmmaker, and I'm an adventurer. So 2021, I was stand-up paddleboarding around the whole of Scotland, and I'd come around to the east coast. I woke up to beautiful weather, the water was really still and calm, which is amazing for stand-up paddleboarding. And paddling from this incredible little tiny harbour, past amazing rock stacks, rock formations, incredible heritage places like Wallago Steps, past bird colonies, puffin colonies, guillemots.
This is one of the most amazing paddles I've ever done. There are birds everywhere.
It was a really, really special day on the water. It felt really peaceful and calm, and I felt like I was just surrounded by amazing nature everywhere. I couldn't have imagined the contrast between the morning to what I was about to find in the afternoon. So I saw something floating on the horizon. I couldn't really see what it was because it was about a mile away, so decided to paddle out to have a little look at it. As I got closer and closer to this big floaty white thing, the water started getting really oily and there were flocks of fulmar all around it. The smell was horrendous. As I got closer, I realised that it was a dead whale. It took a moment to register what it was that we'd found. I was still convinced it was going to be a big block of plastic. That's what I'd hoped we'd found, not a dead whale. When we did come across it, it was almost this kind of adrenaline-fueled reaction of, okay, this is what we found. And so we went into this very kind of clinical mode of, we need to capture this because this is really important. And at that point in time, I had to really suppress what I was feeling and just get everything we possibly could captured on cameras. We didn't immediately know why it had died. We could see that it had been dead for at least a few days. It was starting to decompose and it was really smelly. And so I paddled quite close to it, which was quite distressing, and found ropes wrapped around its pectoral fins, and then I followed those ropes back to its tail, where I put a GoPro in the water and found that the tail stalk was completely entangled with ropes, and there was actually a rope leading down towards the seabed with lobster pots attached to it.
This is really tragic to see. These are really rare animals in these waters. It's very, very highly likely that this whale has died as a result of entanglement in fishing gear. This is absolutely devastating.
It wasn't just the finding a dead body. I'm quite used to seeing dead animals as a vet, and that sounds really morbid, but I'm quite used to seeing a dead animal. It was more the implications, the fact that this was a juvenile whale, this was a potentially 1-year-old humpback whale who had not only died but potentially suffered quite significantly as a result of that entanglement. I didn't really have time to process any of this until I got back to land, and I paddled back into land. I'd been out on the water for something like 8 hours that day. I was quite exhausted and the adrenaline was just starting to crash from having found the whale. And James put the camera on me and said, you know, how are you feeling? And I literally had no words. I felt really devastated, but I also felt angry. I felt frustrated that this huge, important animal, this, you know, juvenile animal, had managed to succumb to human activity in that way, that it just felt so wrong, and I felt so hopeless and helpless, because what could I do about that?
Humpback calf floating upside down. And the thing is now, what do I translate that to? What do I do? How do I turn that into action? Oh dear.
My instant reaction was definitely one of despair and feeling like I really needed to do something about this, because this was such an injustice. It's so unfair that a massive cetacean that belongs in our ocean cannot swim through our waters. I think one of the reasons I was most affected by this is that humpbacks, they live in family groups. The calves stay with their mothers until they're about a year old. They have this close family bond. I think as well with whales, we really relate to them. They're such intelligent creatures, and we're learning so much more all the time about their culture, about their family groups, about the way they communicate with each other. You know, you look into the eye of a cetacean, of a whale or a dolphin, and you feel like you're looking into a creature that's very similar to you. The idea that a calf could have been lost amongst this group of humpbacks, and the implications for them as well, and the impact that it might have had on them, felt quite painful. Over the next 18 months between the incident happening and now, that kind of anger and frustration has definitely morphed and evolved, and I feel differently about it now, having spoken to lots and lots of people who are working in this field and learning about the hard work that's going on to help mitigate this, and the measures that are out there which are being trialled to help stop cetacean entanglement in Scottish waters. It's also really important to remember that entanglement in fishing gear is never intentional, and actually it can be quite distressing for fishers who find animals entangled in their gear. So I think it's really essential that we don't actually demonise a particular group of people, but work with them to help solve these issues. And that is exactly what the creel fishermen in Scotland are trying to do, is trying to solve these issues. Looking back, it still affects me to this day, but I think it's changed from having been a really devastating thing to experience to having had quite a positive impact on my understanding of entanglement. You hear about entanglement, but it's so intangible. It's such this kind of out there in the ocean issue, and then seeing it yourself, seeing this enormous animal having succumbed to entanglement is very, very different, seeing it actually for yourself. So it's estimated that globally 300,000 whales and dolphins every year are caught up in fishing gear, but we have no real idea of what the actual numbers are, because for every animal that we find caught up in fishing gear, there could be another one that's out to sea, lost out to sea, or that's sunk to the bottom of the sea. We need to keep working hard and to keep coming together and supporting those at the forefront of this work so that we can find solutions as fast as possible. Without hope, we have no reason to keep moving forward and to keep making positive change. But at the same time, the issues facing our seas are so enormous. And I found that quite difficult when telling this story, to make sure that it wasn't just a tale of hopelessness and of devastation, but that actually we take note of the good stuff that's happening and the positive movements forward to help create safer oceans for cetaceans.
Last year, something quite incredible happened, a behaviour that I was quite shocked by. This was something that actually kind of threw me quite a bit, and it really challenged what I knew and what I thought about urban foxes. I'm Sean McCormack, I'm a conservationist and vet, and I run Ealing Wildlife Group, and this is our nature reserve here in West London, which is an old derelict allotment site that we've turned into a community asset for people and wildlife. I'm fascinated by foxes. I grew up kind of in the suburbs in Ireland, and my cousins lived in the countryside, and I only saw foxes in the countryside really. But in recent decades, you know, they have moved into towns and cities. We've been looking at a family of foxes for the last 3 years. Now last year, something quite incredible happened in terms of fox behaviour. We had 2 vixens raising their young together in the same den. But in the middle of the summer, it kind of took a bit of a dark turn. When we were watching these foxes, we realised the 2 had cubs together because we saw the little babies coming out of the den. We were watching them with trail cameras and coming up here in the evenings to see them. When I came up and saw 1 cub come out and 2 cubs come out, I thought that's fairly normal. But then when we got to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cubs in total coming out, I was just completely astonished and scratching my head a little bit, to be honest. How was there 9 cubs? Could a single fox have 9 cubs? And then placing a trail camera there and watching the family, I realised actually there was 2 vixens. There was a young one, presumably the daughter of last year, having her young with the mum. I can only assume that this was to do with kind of competition for den space, but it's something that's not very well documented in foxes, so it was really exciting to see here. By and large, you know, it was all very, very happy scenes. We had these 9 foxes frolicking and asking mum for food, and had flattened a whole area of vegetation outside the den. And it was really, you know, a happy little family story. But unfortunately, one day that took a slightly darker turn. I came down to put some tools back and unfortunately found one of the cubs dead at the front of the reserve. I realised the cub had puncture marks in its neck, and there was fresh blood there and puncture marks like the animal had been killed by presumably another fox. Kind of got thinking that this must be kind of territoriality or competition. Maybe another male fox came in and killed this cub. Maybe a competing female came in and killed one of their cubs. But in any case, the cub was dead, and the biologist in me was very interested in this. The vet in me was quite interested in the anatomy and the forensics of the scene. But the human in me that, you know, is putting aside the kind of scientific mind thought, oh, that's pretty sad. You know, I've been watching these fox cubs for several weeks at this stage and seeing them thrive and grow. So to have at least 1 killed, I was a little bit worried about the other ones. So I thought, waste not, want not, I'm going to actually set up a camera at this fox cub's carcass and see what happens. We know we have red kites in the area, we sometimes have buzzards flying overhead. So I thought, let's see what comes and makes use of this food resource. And I was really, really surprised as to what happened next. So we had the usual culprits come along, crows, we had magpies feeding off the carcass. That evening, the same evening, one of the mother foxes appeared. She gingerly stepped around this little fox cub's carcass and kind of was looking at it from a distance and looking very hesitant about it, and just having a look and trying to decipher what exactly had happened, in my view. It was quite a sad scene, you know, to see these 2 vixens coming in. I'm not sure, you know, which one was actually the mother of this cub, but they both raised these cubs together. So quite sad to see them kind of looking at this cub and trying to figure out what happened. None of the cubs came near the carcass as far as we could see, but the vixens were coming in and getting gradually closer to the carcass and starting to sniff it on the 2nd day and starting to take tentative little nibbles or bites at it on the 3rd day. That evening on the third day, we saw a behaviour that I was quite shocked by. They actually started to eat the carcass. As a vet, you know, I can tend to compartmentalise or kind of keep emotional side of things out of the way, because you have to make tough decisions and you have to be impartial for your clients, and yes, you can acknowledge the kind of emotions and sentiment behind our relationships with animals, but you have to try and have a bit of self-preservation as well. With this was a family that I watched, you know, growing up and thriving, and would normally watch with a biologist's hat on and just be interested in their behaviours, but this was something that actually kind of threw me quite a bit, and I found it quite sad. But I guess the rational brain came in to think, why is this happening? How can it be explained? What is the logic? What's the evolutionary advantage here in this mother fox, or both mother foxes, eating their offspring? This was a really fascinating thing to see, because for me, I was trying to think, why would these foxes do this? Are there several reasons behind it? And I could think of two really, and looking at the research, this is supported as well. One would be that this is a valuable nutritional resource. You know, they're in an urban environment, there's lots of foxes, very dense populations, competition for food is really high, and sometimes there'll be times of plenty, and sometimes food supplies will be in scarce demand. So they could have just been utilising this fox cub because it was there, it was a rich food resource, and why waste it after putting all of that energy into it? So these vixens realise that there's competing foxes around, one of which may have killed this cub, and actually by cleaning the remains and taking them away, they may reduce the risk that their other cubs are going to come to harm. It tends to be the rule that they don't do that because there's a high risk of disease transmission, particularly when it comes to parasites. So certain parasite life cycles rely on a predator eating a prey species, and a parasite like a worm or an internal kind of protozoan parasite completing its life cycle by getting the prey to be eaten by the predator. A predator eating a predator can actually have really harmful effects if they load up on that parasite life cycle or that parasite species. So generally mammals, it's been shown, will avoid eating other carnivores. The biggest kind of difference, I suppose, when you compare them to their countryside cousins, is they're living in much denser populations. You can have, you know, kind of 2 to 10 foxes per square kilometre. Sometimes in some cities, depending on food availability and kind of the richness of the habitat, you can have up to 30 individuals per square kilometre. So that's a really, really high density of foxes. And the things that allow them to do that, really, the prime kind of factor is food availability. We are, as humans, a wasteful species. We throw out a lot of food. We leave scraps on the street, we leave our bins exposed, and foxes have really, really cashed in on that. Out of the 9 cubs, we don't know how many survived. What we do know is that we've had just a single pair here this year and only 2 cubs. So obviously you get some good years where things go all to plan, and other years where the foxes struggle to raise so many. Foxes are quite opportunistic omnivores. They will take advantage of new situations and new sources of food, which is perhaps why they do so well in urban environments and why we're seeing all these strange and new behaviours compared to their country cousins.
Although you might think, oh, you know, it must have been difficult to watch, it actually wasn't, because in that moment I remember I was just really excited, despite being out all the time, seeing all kinds of things. I've never seen this before. I'm Yola Williams. I'm a wildlife TV presenter, but for 15 years between 1984 and 1998 I worked for the RSPB, and I'm going to take you back to late June 1998, and part of my role was to monitor rare breeding birds. And on this particular day I was heading up this quite narrow, quite steep valley, but on the way up I knew that I was going to pass a massive old raven's nest. But it had been taken over that year by a pair of nesting peregrines. All of a sudden I could hear a commotion, and I looked down, see all 3 chicks, 2 males and a female. They'd been out to the nest maybe at that time probably anything between 1 and 4 days, so they weren't experienced birds at all. But the commotion was because the adult female was coming back to the nest with prey, and of course the chicks knew they were going to be fed, only this day was a little bit different. Looking through my bins, I could see this powerful bird of prey carrying a fairly large prey with her. And as she came near, I could make out the prey. It was a collared dove. So she'd been a long way off to get that, because the nearest urban area, the nearest village, is about, I would say, maybe 2.5 miles away. It's a long way off. And that's where she would have had to go to get that prey. Usually the female would come back, the prey would be dead. She'd land either on the nest or on a ledge nearby, and then she would leave the prey for the young to fight over and to feed themselves. But that didn't happen this day. She came back, and then she gained height and she circled around. And the 3 young chicks were screaming away, begging for food. And by now I'd lost all interest on the moor, on the harriers and the merlin. For all I know, the harriers could have been sky dancing, they could have been Strictly Come Dancing going on there. For all I know, my focus by now was just down on this peregrine nest and this cliff. And then she gained height and she was almost eye level with me by now, and the 3 chicks were coming up after her. And through my binocs I could see that actually the dove wasn't dead, she was still very much alive. And what happened next was a real eye-opener, because I'd never seen anything quite like it before. The female let the collared dove go, and the collared dove could still fly. She flew away, she flew back up the valley from where they'd come, and this collared dove just turned around and went out of sight. And the female peregrine, the adult female, went straight after it like an arrow, zipping up the valley, and I thought, that collared dove isn't going to go away, surely. And the next thing, she comes back down the valley again with this collared dove. And I watched as she came, and she was holding on tightly, and as she flew, she actually bent down to take a peck at the back of the collared dove's neck. And I thought, that's it, she's killed it. But she hadn't. And it was at this point that I realised what was going on. She was bringing back the prey alive for the chicks, for the 3 chicks to learn how to hunt. By now, one of the chicks, a young male, had landed back by the nest, still screaming, but the other 2, a young female, a young male, were in the air, getting all excited all over again, and she dropped the dove, and I saw that the dove couldn't fly as well as she had before. And the young male went after it and had a go and came down. And bear in mind, you know, these are the Lamborghinis of the bird world. You know, an adult peregrine can dive at speeds of over 200 miles an hour, stooping down and hitting its prey, often killing it, and then before it hits the floor, coming back down, getting hold of it, carrying it away. So they're magnificent birds, real masters of the air. But of course the young birds weren't. They had to learn all of these skills, and despite the young male having a go, trying to catch this dove, it just couldn't. And the dove eventually got away again, heading up the valley, didn't get as far, wasn't flying as fast, and the adult female circled around. She went after it again, caught it one more time. And by now I was thinking, is this bird going to get away? Is it going to escape this time? Although you might think, oh, you know, it must have been difficult to watch. It actually wasn't, because in that moment I remember I was just really excited. I was watching something that very few people get to watch. I was watching something that I'd never seen before, despite being out all the time, seeing all kinds of things. I've never seen this before. And then when she came back again, I saw her this time, the dove didn't get very far, and she just caught up with it, didn't stoop on it, caught up with it and got hold of it, and then turned around and brought it back up again. And this time let it go, and this time the dove, well, to be honest with you, it really could barely fly at all. And it was the young female that had a go this time, and she stooped down, not from on high, but she stooped down, she hit the dove. I remember hitting a dove, but she didn't hit it in the right place. She's supposed to hit the dove, you know, by the head or the neck, and try and, well, at least injure it so that it lands, or if you can, kill it outright. She hit the dove somewhere near the back. A puff of feathers came up, started to tumble down, but the dove just kept on going. And at this point, the young female, she must have been a bit confused, and she just more or less just gave up. She just screamed, circled and screamed. And the dove tried to get away one more time, and this time, poor thing, just got, you know, maybe 50, 100 meters, and I could watch her all the way, and the adult female went after her, caught her again, easily this time, brought her back to the nest, onto the nest itself this time, the big old raven nest. And despite all 3 chicks now being airborne, screaming at her, begging, come on, we want food, we want to be fed, she just ignored them. She obviously now she'd had enough and thought, no, listen, I worked hard for this. This now is going to be my meal. And she mantled, she had her wings out over the dove, she dispatched it, she killed it, and she started to feed, and she just ignored the cries of the young female and both young males, and she just fed on that, and she fed on it for about good 20-25 minutes, and eventually I could see her fly off with a full crop, real bulging crop here, full of meat, and then the adult female and both young males went in to squabble over the remains. It was an amazing thing to witness, and witness so close as well, to watch this, the sort of king of birds when it comes to speed, you know, the fastest animal on the whole planet, just bringing back this dove and trying to teach the youngsters how to hunt. By the time those youngsters leave the adults, and that takes more or less 2 months or so, they have to be able to hunt. They have to be able to stoop at speeds of 200 plus miles an hour. They have to be able to catch prey to survive. Bear in mind that over the first, year, 18 months or so, maybe 1 in 3 young peregrines survive. That's it. And they're lucky if they live to be 5 or 6 years old. So all of that learning has to be crammed into those first 2 months. And I suspect that would probably have been the first time that the adult female peregrine would have done that, would have brought back live prey, released it for the young to chase. But, I've been going back up onto those moors every year now. I love my harriers, I love my merlins, I love my birds of prey, my peregrines, and I've never, ever seen anything quite like that again.
What was meant to be a happy ending turned out to be just the opposite. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever seen in terms of animal behavior in the wild. Hi, my name is Ashwika Kapoor. I'm a wildlife filmmaker based in Calcutta, India. So when I was young, I used to travel up a lot to the northern part of the state, so North Bengal, in the foothills of the Himalayas. As a child, I used to go a lot to that region because my dad worked for a tea company. All of Duas is like a patchwork of forests, villages, and tea plantations. Because the forests are so close to the villages and the tea plantations, they're just absolutely adjacent to each other. We used to see a lot of wildlife there. You'll see elephant conflict stories in the news quite often from North Bengal because they constantly come into contact with human beings. It's one of the trickiest places on earth for elephants to exist, really, because this is a completely human-dominated landscape. This particular incident that I remember, although it happened a very, very long time ago, it's sort of burnt into my memory because it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever seen in terms of animal behavior in the wild. We were staying at a standard tea garden, a big bungalow in the tea garden. We had finished dinner, it was evening, it was after sunset, when out of the blue, suddenly, we started hearing a whole lot of noise coming from the village area. People were shouting, and we could hear drums, and we could hear all kinds of noise. And one of the most telltale signs were these big firecrackers that were being shot up into the air. That was a straight-cut telltale sign that elephants had strayed into the village or into the paddy field. People tend to collect in really large numbers, make a lot of noise, they use firecrackers, and they just shout a lot and beat drums just to be able to sort of drive the herd back into the forest. They come to forage. The paddy fields are right there, it's easy food for them, and they essentially come to raid the paddy fields. As soon as we heard this big noise coming from the village area, within minutes, I remember we just piled into this one vehicle. By the time we reached, of course, they had already quite successfully managed to drive most of the herd back into the forest. And in that chaos, initially I didn't notice that there was a whole different story playing out on another side of the paddy field. There was one very small elephant, tiny, absolutely tiny, elephant that was left behind by the herd. In that moment, I didn't at all feel like the villagers were trying to harm her. There was just a lot of chaos, a lot of excitement. There is obviously conflict in that region in the sense that people have to protect their paddy fields and have to protect what keeps them alive and keeps their families fed. So in that sense, there is conflict because they have to get the elephants to go back into the forest. But in terms of animosity towards the elephants, the beauty and the complexity of North Bengal is that the people don't necessarily feel like the elephants are their enemies. Not at all, actually. I remember coming back that night when asking Dad, what's going to happen to that baby elephant? The manager of the tea plantation said, look, this happens. This is not unusual. This happens. And the forest department takes care of it. They will, sometime over the next few days, try and find the herd that this baby belongs to and reunite the calf with the herd. The tea garden manager had made a few calls saying that when you're dealing with it, let us know and we, if we can witness it. And somebody gave him a call, letting him know that they had found the herd that this baby belonged to, and they were going to take the calf to the herd and reunite the calf with the family. We piled into this car. I remember it was quite a long drive. I was very surprised at how far the herd had traveled overnight. And from a vantage point, we could see this big elephant herd on the other side of the riverbed. I remember standing there and watching the forest department people sort of try and guide this tiny, quivering, helpless, sort of tired calf, trying to sort of direct this calf towards the elephant herd. But what was meant to be a happy ending is what I was expecting, turned out to be just the opposite. The mother was constantly ignoring the calf and walking off, not paying any attention to this calf. When she finally managed to get really close to the herd and almost got like right inside it, the mother turned around, trumpeted really loudly, and sort of pushed this calf full force with her trunk, essentially rejecting her. I couldn't believe my eyes. Elephants are, in my mind, they're supposed to be these loving, caring, gentle giants, especially when it comes to their own families. They're so protective of their babies. They're tender with their babies. They're like the ultimate symbols of matriarchs in the wild. What I saw in front of me was just betrayal. It was cold betrayal and what looked like cruelty. And there came a point where this herd sort of disappeared into the forest and this calf was just standing there alone, waiting to sort of, I don't know, just waiting to understand where to go next. And the forest department at that point sort of stepped in again and guided her back towards the car and put her back onto the truck, and that was that. One thing that I was quite clearly told is that the survival chances of a calf that small is quite low. Because the survival chances of that calf may not be particularly great, there is a chance that the herd, the mother, will reject that baby, knowing that she may not make it. I've tried to find out why this happens and tried to look into the science of why it happened. In most cases, it seemed to sort of suggest that elephants tend to reject calves in particularly stressful environments. But in this particular region, this is not unusual because these elephants live under some of the most stressful conditions on the planet. They're living in an area which is surrounded by human habitation, and they're constantly in conflict with people all the time. And they can't move from one region to another without constantly coming in contact with people, and therefore there's that conflict. And they're such a complex species when it comes to sort of emotional evolution. And you expect a very different side to elephants, but then you wonder whether the circumstances changes that narrative.
All of a sudden, this gull went head first, you grabbed the rabbit in its bill. There was a huge kind of ruckus, there was huge movement, the gull was flapping around, the rabbit was kicking, trying to run away. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'm Lizzie Daly, I'm a wildlife biologist and broadcaster. I was on Skooma Island to film a series, and I was with a friend who was helping me film all the behaviour, everything from seals and porpoise offshore to watching the wildlife on land, such as the short-eared owls, hunting and feeding, the puffins going back and forth to their burrows. And I remember I went to a part of the island to, see if there was anything interesting going on. So as I looked over this one section of cliff, watched puffins coming in and out with sand eels in their mouths, going into their burrows, flicking away mud as they do, cleaning their burrows. And in the remnants of bluebells and sea campion, there was a few rabbits, and there was also a few gulls as well. As soon as a gull would come off the cliff, it would send these puffins kind of in a huge swirl, like a tornado, around the island. It was an incredible thing to see. This gull was trying to steal the sand eel out of this puffin's mouth, and they'd go tumbling through the air. The puffin would be trying to make it back to the burrow with all that food in their mouth to feed to their chick. Out the corner of my eye, I noticed one great blackback gull just standing, near a few burrows, and behind the bluebells there was a rabbit, and the rabbit was just feeding, as they do, along this cliff. I got my binoculars up and was just watching them for a while when I started to notice this gull was getting closer to this rabbit. And this was going on for a few minutes. Not a lot else, but this gull was inching closer and closer. And I've known of this behaviour for a while, and I know it's been captured on video, but I've never seen this with my own eyes. So all of a sudden, this gull went head first, you grabbed the rabbit in its bill, and there was a huge kind of ruckus, there was huge movement, the gull was flapping around, the rabbit was kicking, trying to run away, and it happened within seconds. And before I knew it, this gull had this rabbit halfway down its throat. It was kind of pushing this rabbit down its throat hole, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing as this huge bird was literally swallowing this rabbit whole. Eventually everything calmed down, and unfortunately 2 little feet in the mouth of this gull turned to, just a gull looking very, very full and very happy with himself. As the gull is swallowing the rabbit whole, it will kind of push the rabbit down its esophagus, and it's a process known as esophageal peristalsis, where it will essentially push down this animal whole, and it will sit in that crop, that huge kind of bulging animal hole will sit there and essentially suffocate to death. Then the bird has a true stomach and a gizzard, and this gizzard is really important for breaking down those bigger chunks or harder to break down bits of the rabbit. The European rabbit is not native to the UK. They've spread all over the world and they're very successful. They're actually native to the Iberian Peninsula and North Africa. They then weren't released on islands like Skooma Island until the 13th century by the Normans. The rabbits are the perfect prey, and they're on the menu for lots of different predators. They have a long breeding period between January and August. They reach sexual maturity around 4 to 5 months. As little as 1 out of 10 of these rabbits will survive to adulthood, will make it through that first year. Across the UK, rabbits are really important prey for lots of predators, but on Skooma Island in particular, they're really important for managing the vegetation, keeping the vegetation nice and short for a lot of the endemic floral species that can be found on Skooma. So they have an important role to play. One of the things you always see with rabbits is they're constantly alert, and they never venture too far away from their burrows either. So, you know, if there's any sign of danger, they are always listening out, always looking out in their surroundings, and they're extremely quick, and they can always go back to their burrows if there's something dangerous around them. One of the characteristics of a prey species is the fact that they, you know, have huge ears, which is really important for them in terms of detecting predators. So they need to be able to have really good listening abilities, and also their eyes are on the side of their head, which is very typical of prey. It gives them much better vision to be able to detect what's in their surroundings. Gulls belong to the family Laridae. There are 60 different species of gull, and they have huge variety, but you know, they can live anywhere from coastal habitats to inland habitats, and they are ground nesting carnivores essentially. They're very good at adapting to their environment, and you know when you're seeing this species in the air. You know, it's got a real presence and a real size on the wing, and also, you know, when you just see it standing along the coastline, this is not just any other gull. This is an impressive, large species that's also a very effective predator. When we think of avian predators, you don't necessarily think of a gull, but they are really up there. You know, they will eat anything, well, largely fish, but they'll eat crustaceans, they'll eat other birds, they'll eat rabbits. So they are really opportunistic feeders, and they're really agile hunters as well. I myself have seen, you know, a great black-backed gull eating a crab, taking off its pincers and cleverly stripping the meat from a crab. I've also seen them hunt Manx shearwaters, which are a fantastic bird on Skomer Island, and they actually carry the Manx shearwaters to freshwater ponds on the island to wash off the salt, we think. I've also seen them, you know, trying to steal sand eels from the mouths of puffins as well. So they will eat whatever they can get their bills on. Whenever I'm in Pembrokeshire, or, you know, seeing Skomer or visiting Skomer today, you know, I'm brought back to that moment of seeing this incredible but gruesome behaviour, and I will always have an appreciation for the great black-backed gull, a true predator, but we'll always be reminded of the gruesome death, you know, that day on Skomer Island.